Hi, this is Hans from Request for Music, and welcome at my introduction video for RFM2 VCO. 2 VCO is a voltage modular module, and you can see it on the left of this setting within voltage modular. And apart from the VCO, I've got a couple of other modules in here that are not published at the moment, but will hopefully be published within a couple of weeks. One of those is the sequencer, which is the first one next to the VCO. Next, I've got a couple of LFOs in there. So it's an LFO module that holds 3 LFOs. Next module is a VCA that has an ADSR or an envelope in there. So that means that the sounds that are going through, the waves are going through, will not be filtered, but it's possible to change the envelope of that. And finally, it's going through a delay, a dual delay, before going into the VM output. So let's have a look and let's zoom in on everything and look at what is going on within the 2 VCO. There is some comment on the side which explains hopefully better if, or at least it'll show you more what is going on. You see that the RFM modules themselves use color coding. And the color coding means that the main inputs are actually placed within the light blue bar on the top, where you can find the CV-in and some other information and the course input, or the course mod, course knob for the tuning of the oscillator. The main outputs and the master level are placed on the orange brownish bar on the bottom, as you can see here. For the rest, all of the knobs themselves have colors as well, where the standard input jacks, because the knobs and the jacks have color coding. The standard input jacks have white rings, as you can see, with the CV input on the top. All kinds of modulation inputs have green rings, so those are the ones like here, and with the phasing and the modulation section. And gate input or outputs, if connected, do have cherry red rings that will be maintained, that kind of setup in other modules as well. And standard outputs have the orange rings. So in the bottom on the orange bar, there are orange rings on the output jacks. So that's the kind of color coding that's involved. Next stop is the oscillators themselves. So the oscillators can be found in the larger, darker purple pane with the settings, as you can see, for the oscillators themselves. Standard, if it's just dragged into voltage modular, it will be set up like this without any settings for other oscillators. Only the sine wave will work, if connected, that is. So let's just do that. Let's just take the output of this and put that into my VCA. So at least I have my sine wave sounding up now. I'll turn the bit down for the moment. And because all of the waveforms have a volume level next to them. First of all, there's the sine wave. Next one's the triangle wave. So I can just add that to it and add the sound of the triangle wave to it like that and dial in exactly what I need. I could take the sawtooth, dial that in, take the square wave, same way, and apart from that I even have some noise in there, and the noise has white settings like this or pink settings like this. So up to you how to actually create the sort of sound that you want. For the rest, you see a switch here for analog and digital, and that means that the waveforms are a bit different. There might be a slight switch noise when you do that, but especially there is a change within the square wave, for instance, in the sawtooth wave, where the analog versions um, are less harsh than the digital counterpart. So that's the difference for them. And the next part in there would be, let's see, would be the tuning for all of the objects. The tuning itself normally is done by the course setting on top here. So you can just go through. You hear that there's some delay on there, but of course this is completely uh, stepless. So use that to do the coarse tuning for both oscillators. There's a fixed setting in here in the bar just underneath the coarse setting, where you can see that there's fixed and it has off oscillator 1 or oscillator 2. And it means that if there's oscillator 1 setting and you've got pitch information coming in from any keyboard. So if I plug something in and I put this on oscillator 1, I can set it to either oscillator 1 or oscillator 2. You won't really hear the difference at the moment, but there is a difference actually in there, in how it's handled. So I'll put it down there. Again, next thing is the detune, the actual detuning for the oscillators. That means that I can use the detune here to change the detuning from oscillator 2 to oscillator 1. I'll pick another sound, I'll pick the sawtooth, switch off the sine wave, so now you can hear that you get this slight detuning, which first of all set it back again. This is normally with the normal sawtooth, and here's the detuning. Then underneath that detuning knob, there's a malt knob, and the malt knob multiplies the effect of the detune knob. So that way you can get larger intervals, and you can go up even to octaves. So let's do that again. So you can use that to really make really fat sounds, and again, just use obviously the normal Alt Control keyboard shortcuts as you're used to set to default settings. So if I do that, something like that, and go here again. Then the output settings itself, I forgot about the mod thing that's even underneath the multiply, because there's the modulation input and modulation attenuator there. So if I connect those to my LFO, I'll take the output of my LFO in here, and first of all do that with standard detuning. So switch it on. It will now modulate the detuning. So weird sounds to be made that way. Okay, next thing is that if you have output like this and you have the detuning, let's take this out and set them an octave apart. So I'll switch my sawtooth on and as soon as I connect the cable to the 2 out, it disconnects that one from the 1-2 output as is on the left. And that means that I can take that output into my VCA, which is actually has a left and right input, and I can use that second signal from the second oscillator to take it apart. And that second one could still be modulated with the modulate and the malt settings. So if I drag that back again in here, something like this, I could still do that. For very full effects if you wanted to. So the 1-2 output and the 2 output, as soon as you connect anything to the 2 out, you disconnect it from the 1-2, so be aware of that. Then, next thing is the modulation part. Obviously there's modulation in there, so I could actually use even modulation on the full oscillator by taking another LFO, putting that into my FM, and change that by using frequency modulation. It obviously is also modulating oscillator 2, but oscillator 2 can actually be modulated in itself by using this modulation input, as you've already seen. Next thing is that obviously we have pulse width modulation, so that means, let's switch this on off for a while. Pulse width modulation is something that only works, as you'll probably know, on square waves or pulse waves. So that means that if I have the standard settings, I'll set these back and get rid of all of this and just use my square wave. And I'll disconnect it from here. Got it set up normally again, and now if I do pulse width modulation, it's going to change the it's going to change the pulse width for the square wave oscillator. And obviously I could have taken this out to the next one as well, so for weirder effects there, for very broad sounds. And apart from that, there are some extra options in there that you might normally do from separate modules, like the glide, for instance. The glide which you can find on the top in the blue bar, where you have a switch for oscillator 1, 1 and 2, or oscillator 2, and the darker blue, the medium blue button or knob with it. And that means that if I play, and I dial this up, it now glides only oscillator 2, so it's very easy to create that kind of analog sounds with it. And if you cannot combine that with a fixed oscillator, for instance. And now I should actually use oscillator 2 with the glide. and use some modulation on that second oscillator. I'll put my ADSR on my envelope on my DCA, so I've got something connected that way. Let's see, where am I? Here's the gate. So for some sort of Scottish kind of melody. I'll actually switch on the oscillator or the sequencer to this one as well to have it being heard. So now I've got this switch on, and I can easily glide one of the oscillators for extra fed effects. Well, I hope this gives some slight impression of what you can do with this, because obviously you can still dial in noise, for instance. And last but not least, the thing that I was almost forgetting is the phase thing that I've got here. I'll switch my ADSR on, off, and I'll go back to standard sine wave. So I'll switch off the rest of the oscillators, switch my ADSR off, and I've got these settings. I'll get back to slightly normal, get some stuff out there. And you see the phase modulation setting here, and the phase modulation input and the phase modulation knob with the light blue color in the just underneath the light blue bar. The phase modulation is a way of, if you know the DX7, you know what frequency modulation does. Phase modulation is nearly the same and changes the waveform by modulating it in audio rate with another waveform. That means that I can actually take out my second output, for instance, and put that into my phase modulation input and dial it in, and it'll change the actual wave, because as you can hear, it's not nearly being a sine wave at the moment anymore, because you can really change that wave. And that depends obviously on the waveform that you use. So the more frequencies are in there, and the more harmonics are within a waveform, the more it will change the sound of that wave. So that means that if I take, for instance, a square wave, turn it down a bit. If I use the square wave, for instance, it will definitely change all kinds of harmonics, and you'll get the weirdest sounds. And obviously that's also it changes by the amount of harmonics that you put in there, or maybe noise again. And the more you put in, the more of that effect you'll get. So that means that if I have something like this set up, and I would actually modulate my second oscillator again by taking, for instance, a triangle wave, put that into my modulation, and start modulating that. It will definitely do very weird things there. So there's definitely room for experimentation there. As long as you keep your levels quite low, it's still usable, and you can really change it to, or use it to change the actual wave of the that you'll be using. So instead of a standard sine wave, you'll get lots of weird harmonics in there, and as you can hear, it changes quite a lot if you go into square wave or sawtooth wave territory for that. So really experiment with that. Anyway, I think that about covers the things that are available within as options within the 2VCO module. And I hope that you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll be enjoying the module itself. And hopefully see you in the next one. Cheers.